Hello and welcome to all of our panelists and our attendees who are joining us across the globe. Happy Pride, and we are delighted to have you here joining us for our panel, A World of Connections to Jewish LGBTQ Pride. Today we'll be hearing from 4 brilliant leaders of Jewish LGBTQ organizations from around the world, and we'll have a chance to learn about their work, celebrate their successes, and dream together about the work that is still to be done for the safety, dignity, and celebration of LGBTQ people. I'm Rabbi Micah Buck-Yael. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns, and I'm the Director of Education and Training at Keshet in the US, and I will be hosting and moderating today's panel. Before we get started, a few logistics that I'd like to run everyone through. First, captioning is available by clicking on the closed captioning button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Depending on which platform you are joining us from, you may also need to click a button labeled Show Subtitles. Throughout the panel, you'll periodically see some prompts for reflection posted in the chat by Keshet. We hope that these questions will help you think about your own experiences, your community, and actions that you can take to support LGBTQ equality in Jewish life. Finally, we will save time at the end of our discussion for questions. So if a question occurs to you at any point during the panel, please feel free to use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit your question, and we will address as many of those as we have time for at the end of the panel. Now, I am excited to welcome each panelist to introduce themselves and to share a little bit about themselves and the organization that they are here representing. So first, I am pleased to welcome Eli Nassau, representing Gimmel in Mexico.
Thank you, Rabbi. Can anyone hear me? I need to ask the administrator to turn on my video, please. That will happen in a second. All right, for now you can. Oh, all right. I will start talking about Gimmel for a little bit while the video turns on, and there we are. There we are. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm coming to you live from Mexico City. It's a great pleasure to be here. Gimmel is the organization that works to provide a safe space and support for the LGBTQ plus community within the Jewish community, but also within the larger LGBTQ plus community in Mexico. We like to do programs that involve social interactions and psychological support, and and also sensibilization and creating awareness within the community at large. So this is an awesome event that we're very thankful to be invited to. So thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Rabbi Micah, and everybody else, because we are in the fight of making this a better place for everybody. So that is what we do. You're welcome to visit our website. And I'm Ellie. I'm an actor, activist, and now in the pandemic, I started giving English as a second language lessons. So thank you, everybody, and that's it. Back to you, Micah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ellie, and welcome. Next, I am excited to welcome Anastacia Thompson, representing Shemah Koleinu in South Africa. Anastacia.
Hello, everyone. I want to say good evening because it's evening in South Africa. I know that we have people joining us from all over the world, and I think that's really incredible, and it's wonderful to be here during Pride Month. I'm Anastasia. My pronouns are she and her. I do many, many things in this world, enough that I can't keep track of them very well. I'm a medical doctor, an author, and an activist in the LGBTQIA+ space, and very excited to introduce you today to Shemah Koleinu, the organization that we're in the process of launching, or perhaps relaunching, as it were, in South Africa, building on the legacy of an organization called Jewish Outlook that was founded a couple of years ago in response to backlash that arose in the Jewish community following the screening of an LGBTQIA+ movie. Jewish Outlook was founded by a group of very passionate, committed, and dedicated activists, of which at least one, Professor David Bulchitz, is in attendance on this discussion tonight. So that's very exciting for us. The organization played a big role in unifying the community and organizing the community, and of course in some of the legal struggles and challenges that the LGBTQIA+ community faced in South Africa. So Jewish Outlook became dormant for a couple of years, and we recognized that there are a number of individuals in South Africa who have been doing this sort of work around education and activism and advocacy and representation for the LGBTQIA+ community, that there was certainly a gap or a deficit in terms of representation at the intersection of that community with Jewish identity. And this has led to the birth or rebirth, as we've said, of Shemah Koleinu, Hear Our Voices. So I'm very excited to share that with you today. And one of the co-founders of Shemah Koleinu is also in attendance, Jackie Benson. So just a shout out to them. And it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you and welcome. I am so glad that you're here with us. Next, I'd like to invite Dalia Fleming, representing Keshet UK.
Hello, I'm Dalia Fleming from Keshet UK. We're an education and training charity working with Jewish schools and synagogues and youth and young adult organizations and communal organizations, working to ensure that no Jewish person, no Jewish LGBT+ person is ever forced to choose between their Jewish and LGBT+ identity. We've been working within the UK community for, kind of depending on how you define it, kind of 5 to 8 years. We originally were a bunch of Jewish people within the community wanting to create a space in terms of education and training. And for the last 4 years, we've been growing gradually to the point we are now three staff. And just this week, we've been delivering in an Orthodox Jewish secondary school to well over 1,000 young people. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you and welcome. And finally, I would like to welcome Xiomara Lorenzo, who is representing Keshet in the US.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here, very proud to be representing Keshet US. What I very much appreciate about the work that Keshet does is that our focus is really on the full equality of all LGBTQ Jews and our families and our communities within Jewish life to promote full inclusion. Our focus is really about working within Jewish organizations and equipping these organizations with the skills and knowledge to build LGBTQ affirming communities. It's not for us. It's not just enough to promote tolerance, but really it's about making sure that we are working towards a vision in which all members of the community are being treated with respect, with love, with inclusion. And that is the work that we do, especially among Jewish queer youth, so that they have spaces, especially during the pandemic, virtual spaces in which they can feel seen and valued. And in addition to that work, we are also very much focused on how we can advance LGBTQ rights nationwide within the U.S. When I am not working or speaking on behalf of Keshet, I am based out of Massachusetts, and I am I'm a director within the digital team within Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. So again, very happy and very proud to be here. Thank you, Micah.
Thank you and welcome. Again, I am so delighted to bring together such a fantastic group of panelists. And let's jump in. The first question I'd like to ask, I'm always curious about what it is that motivates and brings people together around this work. So I'd love to invite each of our panelists to speak to why you personally do this work, and particularly, why do you do this work in a Jewish context? If there's a particular piece of Jewish tradition or text or storytelling that is part of that, I would love Love to hear about that as well. And I'm going to invite Ellie to speak first on this one.
Thank you. Well, personally, I got involved in this because I went to a Jewish or Hebrew school all my life, and I got a lot of bullying from being the way I am, from liking the things I liked. And after I finished high school and went on to study in a university that had a fantastic LGBTQ program, I realized that you could be both Jewish and gay. I went to a university in Los Angeles, California, and there I started getting involved in Jewish life, in queer life. So and I realized that I wanted to kind of bridge those two identities that had been very isolated from each other. So since then, I have been working towards that goal, within myself, and also trying to help others realize that goal. Of course, Tikkun Olam is one of the values I go by. The making the world a better place, or leaving it better than how you found it. There's the saying called Israel Aredim Ze Lazeh, so everybody's responsible for each other. So that's kind of how I like to go by, and just avoid or helping people not go through the things I had to go through when I was younger. That's it. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Thank you. That's so powerful. And I feel like I have so many questions, but I actually want to hand this to Anastacia to speak next. I want to hear from all our panelists.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Ellie, for sharing that powerful story. I think, for me, a lot of my experiences centered around, I'll delve a little bit into my history, in that I came from a secular Jewish family. I went to an Orthodox Jewish school. Certainly, I know that growing up, I wasn't educated at all around LGBTQIA+ identity. And I sort of had to carry this sensation of knowing that I didn't fit in, and not really being able to understand the reasons why until much, much later in life. I don't want to say I was a gifted child, but I was intelligent enough to recognize that I didn't want any undue attention, and I kind of devoted all of my energy and resources into trying to slip under the radar and behave in ways that were expected of me, even if that took a tremendous toll on me emotionally, physically, etc., etc. When I did finally understand who I was, and I had the vocabulary at last to start putting the pieces of my own identity together, this was much later on in my adult life, and I was working as a primary care physician in Johannesburg, a different city in South Africa than the one I live in now, in a practice that very much catered largely towards the Jewish community. And to cut a long story short, I was outed against my will and without my consent, and it suddenly became a very heated and controversial subject in the community. And I reflect on what happened during that week that this news broke about me, and I feel like on that Friday evening, I was spoken about at every Shabbos table in the neighborhood, but I wasn't invited to any of them. And of course, there was some support that I received, but a lot of the comments that I received were really just painful. I was told that I'm an abomination and an affront to God and all kinds of things. So this really precipitated a split between my own identity my sexual orientation, my gender identity, and my faith and my Jewish identity. And I used to say Judaism and I are seeing other people. We're separated. And I realized at a point that this had left a little bit of a wound for me and a bit of a void. And it took a lot of maturity and reflection for me to understand that my faith and my cultural and my religious identity was a birthright to me and something that I got to define on my own terms. So I started looking for resources in order to reconnect with this community. And of course, I came across organizations like Keshet. I realized very soon that there wasn't really at that time an active organization present in South Africa, but I did manage to find some community spaces that were affirming, that did help to validate this experience at the intersection of Jewish identity and queer identity. And I came to understand that, you know, I get to define what my faith means to me, and no one gets to do that for me. You know, I live my life according to a set of ethical principles, and I sleep soundly at night knowing that I'm on good terms with the divine. And I realized that I was in a fortunate position to have been able to overcome this and to understand that there is some degree of reconciliation. Of course, you know, this opened the door to recognizing that there are so many experiences of people at this intersection that are really defined by pain and by trauma and by loss, and that there's a lot of work to be done in trying to bridge that gap. So it was really recognizing that there's a responsibility on me almost, and again, I struggle to find the right words, but as someone who had to whatever degree faced that struggle and overcome it, of course, it's a constant thing. You know, we wrestle with these ideas on an ongoing basis. It's not like you ever really fully put the struggle behind you. But I realized that perhaps I have a commitment, or I felt a responsibility to start doing work in this space because, you know, and this is something, and I'll put a little bit of a content warning out there before I go any further. So if you are sensitive to these issues, of course, you might just want to protect yourself from this. But our community, and I'm sure many other communities or Jewish communities across the globe, have suffered losses of people, whether it be to violence or to suicide, because of their identity and because of their queer identity. And I think it's so easy to avoid doing that damage to other people. And I think that the perpetration of those kind of harms against one another are so contrary to the values and the ethics that tie us together as a Jewish community. And to me, that's just really tragic. So one of the tenets of my philosophy and my understanding of this is that we are created B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of the divine, and the diversity that manifests in us is not an imperfection or a flaw or a mistake on the part of the divine, but really just an expression of that diversity and something that should be embraced. So that's the philosophy that guides my work. And of course, through this process, I've certainly met other people at the same intersection who've been doing the same sort of work. And this is really the desire to unify and solidify all of those efforts, and to amplify each other's voices. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that powerful story and for that powerful, still no? Good. Thank you so much for that powerful story and for that powerful connection to the very real stakes of the work that we're doing. I'm going to invite Dalia now as well to share.
Hi, thanks. I think when I've tried to really think about the reason why, not only because it felt like essential work, but because in the UK context, we realized no one else was doing it. We've had LGBT plus Jewish social groups since the 1970s. The Jewish LGBT plus group in the UK has been going for a really long time, but there was an incident actually at an Orthodox Jewish school around kind of so-called conversion therapy practices, right? The idea that you can turn someone cis or straight, which we know is damaging and dangerous. And we realized that the reason that was able to happen in this particular school is because no one had ever spoken to them. No one had tried to go in from an educational perspective and an educational voice and an educational way to have a conversation, to explain the impact and the understanding. And I think that really brought together quite a few alumni of that school, of which I am one. And we started trying to work out what can we do from an educational and training perspective in the UK, which is a more kind of small c conservative Orthodox community, and what approaches can we use to try to do that. And I think one of the reasons that I felt like it was important is because, kind of as Anastasia said, we can be in control of our own narratives, we can be in control of our own stories, and although obviously it is not essential for every Jewish LGBT plus person to want to be the educator, it felt like something that I did have the ability and the want to do, and it felt like my responsibility amongst all of our other volunteers and staff to work out how to communicate to the Jewish community in the UK that we exist, and that we are parts of the community, and how, as a Jewish community in general, we can be doing better, whether Reform, Liberal, Masorti, Orthodox, that there's always more that we can be doing, and to really engage in that. So for me, it felt like I had that responsibility. And to be honest, I honestly think it is because I was just brought up in a Jewish household of debate and conversation and challenge, and one in which I was always encouraged that if there was something that I could do or could see or wanted to chat about, we should work out how to do that. Not as, I think loud and shouty as my Shabbat tables were, but in a way that actually people can listen and people can hear. So I think that's for me why I particularly do this kind of work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. It's making me think of this snippet of text that I love in the Jewish tradition. It teaches, if you're in a place where no one is acting like a person, strive to be a person, right? This notion of seeing a space for our work and moving into it. Thank you. And Xiomara, finally, I'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's gone so far. I'm particularly drawn to this work because it is so clear that it's needed. It's so clear that exactly as everyone on the panel has shared so far, both from a personal reflection perspective, as well as in the work that we do more broadly in our communities, that with so much progress that we have been a part of, that those before us have been a part of, that there is still so much work to be done within the various communities that we touch and that we influence, again, to decenter the narrative of tolerance, if the narrative has already gotten there, to actually moving beyond and saying that we want to envelop, that we want to center who is at the margin and actually have them and us speak to how we can continue to grow and create more empowerment and more inclusion from that perspective. And so for me, I see that work as ongoing. I see myself as being a thread in that kind of larger tapestry or fabric. And I feel really energized by being a part of this community, this member of panelists, as well as working with Keshet on how we can continue to support, especially LGBTQ youth, to feel empowered. I think even earlier than when I felt empowered, arguably probably more my 20s, going into my 30s. If anything, I'd want to shift that back to even to younger members of our communities. And so specifically in working with Keshet and the programming that we do, the ways in which we bring youth together, to hear I remember, say, this is the first time I've been able to find other people like me, and ways that I've been able to get affirmed, really speaks to both the value of the work, as well as the importance of listening to our youth and hearing what they need so that we can continue to build in ways that that really centers their perspectives and make sure that we're actually headed in the right direction. So that to me is why I do the work. On a personal note, and certainly in terms of Keshet within the US, when I came into the Jewish community, I didn't really have a way of knowing, kind of like, certainly converting into Judaism is one thing, but then also having Jewish communities that would also allow me to continue to understand that particular part of myself. And Keshet, I always think of it as it's always been around me, whether I was in New York or now in Boston, and just seeing, whether it's programming of Keshet or events that Keshet, has had throughout my journey, Keshet's always been there. So on a personal note, I see myself as very much wanting to put forward the work that I have tremendously benefited from. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Xiomara. These stories are so powerful, and these words of wholeness and of striving and of wanting to build a world that's just a little bit better than the way that we found it. This leaves me incredibly excited and passionate about the work going forward. So I would love to ask our panelists another question. This has been, I have to acknowledge, an incredibly challenging year for all of us. And within that, I am curious if each of you could share one success that your organization or your LGBTQ Jewish community has experienced. And I'm going to invite Anastasia to share first.
Thanks so much, and what an important question. It certainly has been a very challenging year. As I mentioned at the outset, I'm a medical doctor in primary care, so I've been very much on the front lines of the pandemic. That's actually why I'm in camouflage at the moment. This is not a political statement. These are my scrubs, because I feel like every day I'm in a war zone as South Africa moves very much into the steep slope of our third wave of the pandemic. I think one of the things that I would love to highlight is really just the way that our community has responded to the unique challenges that we faced in this past year. And I think the centerpiece or the showcase for that would really be International Pride Month. So typically Cape Town celebrates Pride in February, and this has to do with weather patterns and all sorts of political forces that are beyond anyone's reason or control. But of course, because of the pandemic, we've taken the opportunity to move very much over to a digital platform. And again, a group of very, very committed individuals, a number of whom are directly involved with our organization, have taken it upon themselves to build up not just to a single event to commemorate Pride, but really to stretch that out in the weeks and the months leading up to Pride itself. So we've done that through a number of different discussions, panels, community workshops, publicity, social media, and indeed a series of Shabbat services that are dedicated to Pride, and really understanding that the concept of Pride is so much more than just a party or a parade. I always love to say that Pride is intensely political, and it's an act of activism. And you have to do the activism before you're able to celebrate by having a party, and really to just reflect on the heritage of Pride, and to recognize that this movement was born more than 50 years ago and was spearheaded indeed by one of the most marginalized groups in society today, and that would be trans persons of color, and to recognize the intersectionality that's inherent in that. So I'm very pleased to say that we have rallied the community in some profound ways. We've had workshops and events that are aimed at parents of LGBTQIA+ youth to spread some understanding and some awareness. We've commemorated the history of LGBTQIA+ identified Jews in South Africa and abroad. Unfortunately, South Africa is in a space where at the moment, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later on in the discussion, but there has been a space of violence towards people in this community. And it's really been about understanding that our community is one and the same, whether we are united by faith or religion or not, that we do have to understand the struggles of people whose experience is different from our own, and to really try and respond to that. And to that end, we've spearheaded some fundraising movements for other NGOs that are working in these spaces in South Africa, and to spread some understanding and awareness of this concept that underlies Pride. And I'm very pleased to say that all of this will very much come to its, I hope, climactic conclusion when we have our centerpiece Pride Shabbat service this coming Friday night. So that's something that's very exciting, and the way that the community has pulled together and overcome all of the challenges, because certainly so many of the role players are just as busy as I am and just as stretched as I am, and as I'm sure so many of our other panelists and attendees are. So I think that's a real testament and something that I'm supremely proud of.
Thank you for that, and יישר כוח. Lots of strength. I'm gonna ask Dalia to share next.
I'm gonna actually keep my response pretty brief. So we've done two things that I was really surprised about. One is we've done way more storytelling training, which we haven't been able to do because it's never been really possible in terms of the breadth of the geography in the UK. So by moving things online, we've been really supporting Jewish LGBT plus people to tell their stories and how to tell their stories, understanding what things add value to the audience, where do they want to make impact, who are they talking to, those kinds of things. And it's been really wonderful connecting with Jewish LGBT plus people, kind of more than we ever have, because so often for us, our customers in some ways are schools and synagogues and youth movements and community organizations and housing associations. And our volunteers are all Jewish LGBT plus people and allies. And then secondly, we are growing. We have had more demand from synagogues across all denominations for support, because in the UK at the moment, there is a need in terms of understanding trans inclusion and what that means, and also more generally across the LGBT plus community. And so we are interviewing at the moment for a head of community life who is going to be specific support in the UK Jewish community for synagogues and communal organizations. And I did not expect to be growing during a pandemic, so I'm very proud of that.
Amazing work to be doing. Xiomara, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, echoing a bit of what Dalia shared, I think during what is we can feel like a very narrow time during the pandemic, and just kind of everything kind of closing in, the idea of expansiveness and growth in some ways might be thought of as counterintuitive, but from Keshet US perspective, we have seen growth and interest in our online programming, rather in our programming, and specifically because we've been able to reach so many more youth by offering remote programming, so that teens who would not be able to, for example, attend an event at one of our one of our geography-based events would be able to actually take their computer, close the door, and be able to connect with a whole other community that would not have been accessible to them. And that's something that we're incredibly proud of, but also that we see the importance of continuing, that this is not, even though that this is what we needed to do to get through, and arguably because the pandemic is still very much ongoing, what needed to happen in response, but it actually opened up for us an opportunity to do exactly what we had intended before the pandemic, which was, to reach as many queer youth as possible. And now we have found, and we're getting engagement on that particular channel in ways that I don't know if we could have anticipated before. So that's definitely a major success that Keshet has been experiencing. And I'd say the other thing, especially just given what's going on within the US, and as we continue to look at ways in which we want to continue to grow our national footprint, really looking at certain parts of the country in which we think that based on both the activism going on within particular states and counties within those states, but also the Jewish communities there, and how we can continue to deepen our partnership and promote advocacy of Jews and queer Jews in those spaces as well. So we're also looking at it from a national perspective. How can we continue to increase our advocacy where it's needed? Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. Yes, it's amazing what shifts when access looks different to our programs. And now I want to invite Ellie to share on behalf of Gimmel.
Thank you. Well, this year, a lot of the things the other participants mentioned resonate with us as well. It's amazing, like maybe if this pandemic happened 15 years ago, maybe we couldn't have done the events. Technology has helped us tremendously. And we definitely took advantage of it. One of the things that we're or I'm very proud of this year is that we collaborated with the, I guess, the Mexican JCC, which is much more than a sports center. It's like a cultural hub for the community. Their slogan is everyone's home. This is everyone's home, because it is Mexico. Maybe the communities are a little separated. You know, if you're Ashkenazi, then you have your own temple and your own school, and if you're Sephardic, etc. So, but the JCC, or the CDI, as it is known here, it is where everybody can meet, and there's a dance festival and a theater festival, and of course, like the state-of-the-art gym and pool and whatever. And now it sounds like I'm advertising for them, but the point is, we collaborated for the first time in a virtual event with them. They invited us not just once, but I think 3 times, to talk about different aspects of being LGBTQ plus and Jewish, which was very, very moving for us and for a lot of people. We had, well, they had very, very amazing responses, and this was one of the things it was on our agenda, I guess, to be able to participate in community spaces such as that one. So that is one of the things we achieved this year, which we are very, very happy for.
Amazing. That is incredible. Thank you all. I want to note that we have one more question that we're going to ask before we start to move into the next segment of the program. But I would love to hear, one of the things that's beautiful about bringing together our different organizations from the different regions of the world that we serve is learning a little bit about the work that we're doing in common, and maybe some of the different questions or issues or challenges or goals that face our work. So I would love to hear a little bit about what feels specific to each of the regions that your organizations are serving. And I'd love to hear first from Dalia.
So I don't know exactly how common or different we are. I know more about actually the United States and North America than I do about Mexico or South Africa. So I'm excited to hear this. But the UK Jewish community is quite small c conservative and majoritatively Orthodox, with some really incredibly vibrant progressive communities when it comes to the liberal community, the Reform community, and Masorti. And so Keshet UK needed to work out how to work with the Orthodox community and work with them. And so I always talk about it in terms of finding the middle of the Venn diagram, right? So we did a piece of work with the Orthodox chief rabbi, Rabbi Mervis, and Keshet UK and the chief rabbi have different views. We do. But what we did is we worked together to work out what can we work together when it comes to the well-being of the young people who his schools and the bodies that he worked with are responsible for. So that's why in 2018 we created the well-being of LGBT plus pupils, a guide for Orthodox Jewish schools, which you can find on his website at chiefrabbi.org/LGBT welfare, which is on our website, but that's a much better URL in my view. And so I think that's something that's quite unique for us, that we have been working to build relationships with the Orthodox community in a way that understands that parts of our community really want to understand what they can do. What is X, Y, and Z? And parts of our community have always felt too afraid and been told, well, we can't do X, Y, and Z. So they've never tried A, B, and C. So we really try to engage with our community in a non-judgmental way, and in a way that says, where are you at? How can we help you? Can we try to reduce harm in parts, right? And we acknowledge that, we have honest conversations. So I think for us, that's something in particular that we have really focused in on parts of the more Orthodox parts of our community, whilst supporting and working with the liberal, Reform, and Masorti parts who have already been able to have some of that conversation. Yeah, so I think that potentially is something that's more unique about us, about the kind of the communities and the way that we work educationally.
Amazing, and something that speaks really powerfully to the impact of relationship building and real storytelling, to pick up on some threads I heard you share before. I'm going to ask Xiomara now to share for Keshet US.
Absolutely. So I'd say in terms of kind of challenges to opportunities is that, as I had highlighted earlier, a big focus for Keshet is, how do we move from tolerance to embrace? I'd say specifically amongst our focus on trans inclusion and also among Jews of color. And so for us, as we are really our focus is on continuing to work with organizations and across, whether we're talking about synagogues or other groups that we've actually partnered with in the past, that we continue, especially during this time, to deepen our relationships with them, because it's unfortunate that when it's discussed around trans inclusion or among Jews of color, JOC, that they remain lightning rod topics that, again, when we talk about going from tolerance to embrace, sometimes there's not even that tolerance. And so for us, we've really been focusing on how can we create spaces for members of our communities who identify as such, and also ways in which to not only create space to come together, but also to focus on supporting and growing leadership. And so Keshet US has been very much focused on ways in which we can both bring together members of our community who identify as trans, as well as who identify as Jews of color, to create spaces in which we can support both. So I'd say from a I always think, again, from an opportunity perspective versus just focusing on challenges, that's where we're really looking to focus. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Knowing who we mean when we say all LGBTQ Jews in our families. It's wonderful. I'm going to invite Ellie to share now.
Thank you. I guess Mexico, I have to say, in some regards, is maybe a few to a lot of years back compared to maybe other countries in this panel. So, Mexico is a beautiful, amazing, diverse, colorful country, but can sometimes be a little conservative, or, they like to think of themselves as a traditional, whatever that means. And so the Jewish community is a little bit like that as well. We kind of take on the values of the country. And then there's well, I guess, yeah, the people who think like in terms of family and values as maintaining the status quo. So one of our biggest areas of opportunity, as Xiomara says, is reaching out to everybody within the community, including in the Orthodox circles. And I'm very happy to have that guide that Dalia shared with us. That's amazing, because yes, it's still going on. And also, I have to say, maybe the younger generations are much more okay with the subject of being diverse sexually and with the gender identity, but the older generations are still, like, not so okay with it, let's say. So this is an area that we would like to keep exploring and growing, and you're just reaching out to different schools. We still have, like, there's a lot of resistance from some schools, from some circles. So that is what we are working on at the moment.
Incredible, thank you. And finally, I'd love to hear from Anastacia on this question.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. I'm going to say that our experiences in South Africa are maybe much closer to Ellie's than Ellie would have wanted to believe. South Africa is in very much a unique position in that we have a constitution and a legal framework that is, by international standards, exceedingly progressive, or at least it particularly was at the point when it was introduced. Unfortunately, it hasn't really taken into account that simply introducing legislation doesn't serve to address intrinsic cultural values and the legacy of homophobia, transphobia, queerphobia that underlies all of that. And I feel conflicted about it, because on the one hand, it's wonderful for me to say I live in a country where we have same-sex unions, noteworthy that they're separate but equal to marriages. We don't really have true marriage equality, but we say that we have marriage equality. We have a legal framework that allows trans people to amend their gender markers, but there's a lot of hoops that they have to jump through in order to do that. We don't have non-binary options. We don't have the option to not have a gender marker listed. And the progressive legislation that we have is maybe sometimes used as an excuse for people to divert attention away from the issues that the LGBTQIA+ community faces, and to say, well, you know, we have marriage equality, we have this and this and this legislation, so they're actually, you know, the human rights struggle is over in that sense. And certainly it isn't over. You know, we've spoken a little bit about hate crimes, and that's certainly one of the big challenges that South Africa faces, perhaps less so specifically in the Jewish community, but certainly still a lot of trauma and issues like suicide. And unfortunately, when it comes to bridging the gap and opening these dialogues with the Orthodoxy, it was very much a fruitless pursuit, until one a tragic young adult lost his life due to suicide a year or two ago. And then suddenly we started talking about this, but there was still so much denial around what was really going on. And this unwillingness to recognize that this horrible tragedy was almost certainly precipitated by the latent homophobia in the community. And in fact, when one Orthodox group in South Africa did finally decide to talk about this, they did so by scheduling a panel that had no representation from the LGBTQIA+ community. And of course, you know, activists started to mobilize around that, and eventually there was some representation at that panel, but only after it was very hard won. And it seems like the conversation has been very muted since then. And I don't think that it should require that kind of tragedy and trauma for us to recognize that we need to have this dialogue, and we really need to start talking about this. I also think that faith-based institutions have a vital role to play in the greater context of human rights and civil rights in South Africa. So, you know, I think that when we speak about hate crimes, even if Jewish queer people have not been the chief targets of that, I think that our community has a responsibility to stand up and to speak out, and to really try and position ourselves in a way that we can be Or La Goyim and a light to the nations, and express that kind of solidarity and unity, and make demands of other faith-based organizations and of government to take serious action against this ongoing space of hatred and violence towards our community. So I'd say that our goals going forward are to really open those streams of dialogue, especially with more Orthodox streams of Judaism, to get people to understand that this, you know, this is an issue of life and death in many ways. And to echo something that Dalia said a little bit earlier on, you know, I don't necessarily expect to have the office of the chief rabbi in South Africa or the Orthodoxy see eye to eye with us on every issue, but I do expect that they would understand that action has to be taken when human and Jewish life is being lost, and certainly to start to interact with the greater structures and political systems and cultural positions that play such a predominant role in the perpetuation of this homophobia, transphobia, and queerphobia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. There's something really true about that tension between the official, the legal, the structural, and what's happening in our day-to-day, and this incredible power that that religious communities have to make change, particularly in that space. Thank you so much to our panelists for this incredible wisdom. Before we turn to some questions from our guests, I'd like to first welcome James Cohen, who is the Chief Development Officer of Keshet US. James.
Wow, thanks, Micah, and thanks to all of these panelists. I just think of this the people united will never be defeated, and how far physically, how far apart we are, and how close we are in the work that we're doing. And I'm just amazed and so appreciative for each one of you for the work that you're doing. And for all the people who are watching this, and there are quite a few of you out there, I see the numbers on the bottom just growing and growing. This is the time when I'm going to turn to you and ask for your support. We're trying something completely new here. We've never done this before. We're raising money for 4 organizations together right now. All money raised during this webinar is going to be split between the 4 organizations you see on the screen, between Keshet UK, Gimmel, Shemah Koleinu, and Keshet United States. So please give generously. I believe that in your chat, you're gonna see a link. Hopefully you see it. And go to that link, give as generously as you can. That donation will be split among the organizations. And you'll not only be supporting these organizations, but you'll also be telling us that this kind of event is the kind of event that you want to see, that we should be doing this again, and that we can leverage the international community to support organizations across borders, and that you're going to show up. You're going to show up not just with your presence, but with your dollars, your pounds, your various currencies across the world. So I'm going to say it one more time. Please go to that link you see on your screen, give as generously as you can, and show us that this is the kind of programming that you support, and that the programming, the programs that you heard each of these panelists describe are the kind of programs that you want in your own community. Thank you so much.
Beautiful, thank you. And thank you again to our panelists for sharing all of this, and to James for creating this space where we can support one another's organizations and collaborate in this way. We are unfortunately nearing the end of our time so very quickly. I think we have time for one of the questions that came in from our participants. And that question is, if there are any of our panelists who would like to speak that ways that Jewish communal organizations can take a couple of concrete steps, right? Steps that aren't about performance, but are about support in the moment, to support LGBTQIA+ staff and members in their organizations.
Yes, if I could.
Xiomara, it looks like you have, please.
Great, thank you. Really quickly, I would say is just to look around your organization, see who's represented and who's not there. Sometimes when we're coming from ourselves, it's difficult to see who is not there because we come from a certain perspective. But it's the humility to ask yourself the question of both who is represented in these spaces, who is not, and then to really ask how are we trying to have these meaningful conversations, and what tools do we need, and what is out there. It sounds very basic, but I think we're still at that juncture of identifying that we're not meant to do this work on our own, and that there are many resources, as we can see globally, that we have access to, that as I saw Dalia put in the chat, that have been cultivated through many private conversations, through many personal appeals, and that should be leveraged and brought in to organizations that are looking to do similar work, that they should be benefiting from the hard work that others have put in to make sure that we are thinking in inclusive ways. So that's what I would say, is to look around you who is not there, and to also have the humility to ask for help.
Beautiful, thank you. I think we have time to hear from one more of our panelists on that question. I don't know if any of you are eager to jump in on this.
Yeah, I mean, why not? I think to add to that,
do it.
As an individual, you can really think about what can you do, where do you have influence, where do you have power, what communities you're a part of, and start talking to people, which I know sounds performative, but actually it isn't. You'd be surprised at the number of people, and particularly in communities that don't have a visible LGBT+ presence. It doesn't mean that we aren't there. Really just need to hear from their community members, from family members, from other people in the community about what they want to be seen and done. And then I think from within a leadership perspective, I think it's about really sitting down and committing time and money and energy and effort to really think about it. Think about the ritual, think about the forms you have, think about who is in your community. And I think the catch-22 is for them to take a lead, but to be able to listen and allow for LGBT plus Jewish people to be stepping up. But I don't think if you're in a community with one LGBT plus Jewish person that you should always be throwing that stuff at them, because it isn't fair. But I think it's about finding that balance. And if you have an organization like Keshet UK or other in your community, working out how they can support you to create spaces where sometimes a Jewish LGBT plus person who may not be out, who may not have wanted to step up, feels like actually they want to have that leadership. They want to be able to express themselves. They want to be visible, but doing that kind of stuff. But in the meantime, you can work on your ritual. You can work on your forms. You can do stuff proactively, which will become a signal, because otherwise, how do people know that your community is safe? How do you know that you can talk to a rabbi, you can talk to a cantor, if you're not proactively saying that and doing that and walking the walk?
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. So in our last minute, I want to name that there's a final question that we have in our queue that is a question about what gives us hope. And what I want to say in this moment is that there is something that gives me tremendous hope for the work that we're doing, and that is seeing the four of you and hearing the incredible wisdom and experience and suggestions and ideas and progress that each of you is making, and knowing, I think, Xiomara, as you began at the beginning of this, that we stand on the shoulders and are part of a much larger tapestry of so many other people who are moving this work forward. So it is very much the human beings who are in this work that bring me personally hope, and I hope that that's a gift that all of our attendees are leaving with today. I want to thank you all again so much for joining and for sharing with us today. And again, to our attendees, thank you, thank you, thank you. It is wonderful to get to have this conversation with you. And I'd like to leave you with a reminder yet again to please support the work of these four organizations by making a donation. You can do that by clicking on the link in the chat if you have not already. And thank you for being with us in celebration, in pride, and in hope today.